From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is Ag Day.
From record-breaking
This is still the world's largest hat collection.
to creating a one-of-a-kind experience.
We just want it to be destination golf that is unique, will give people an experience that they can't have at most places, and so far it's working out.
And everything in between.
And you can just imagine that the land all around was just covered in oil.
We're hitting the road and taking a tour of the American countryside right now on Ag Day.
Ag Day is brought to you by Pioneer.
Ben's bins, please hold.
Yeah, Ben's has been busy all day.
Seems like no one can keep up with this new Z series. What did you all put in these seeds?
Science.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Summer road trip season has arrived. And if you're looking to get out and take a tour of the country, why not check out some things along the American countryside? Andrew McCrae will be leading the way this morning. We start in North Dakota and one man's effort to save his hometown.
Gary Greff grew up in Regent, North Dakota. The town wasn't large, but had several businesses, and his dad ran the local grain elevator. Gary became a teacher and later a principal, serving in several schools in North Dakota and Montana. After his most recent tenure as principal, he made a trip back to his hometown.
While I was looking for this job, I saw that the town of Regent had gone from a town of 500 to a town of roughly 100 people. The town was dying.
Soon Gary's focus was not on another principal job, but what to do for his hometown. Regent was 30 miles from thousands of cars traveling on Interstate 94, but how could he lure people down the road? He eventually decided that creating huge scrap metal sculptures along the highway might do the trick. But perhaps Gary had a huge obstacle in his way.
Never laid a bead of weld in my life, never had an art class, just said, let's go for it.
His first sculpture was of a family, man, woman, and child, using large oil tanks as the foundation for the piece. It took almost 3 years to construct, and it was now Gary's full-time job. He lived meagerly, but he says he enjoyed the time he could spend with his siblings and aging parents as he worked on the project. Some in the community were skeptical.
When you bring art into a farming community, you know what farmers think of art. Artists are not considered, part of farming.
Gary says farmers are artists, though, with what they do with the land, and his sculptures often share scenes from rural America. The first 4 sculptures didn't attract huge crowds, but once he placed one near the interstate, travelers began to come. Gary describes the scenes he's created as you drive south to Regent.
You start at Geese in Flight, that's on the interstate. From there you go to the Deer Crossing, and then after that we hit Grasshoppers in the Field. From Grasshoppers in the Field we hit Fisherman's Dream. Then we go to Pheasants on the Prairie, and then we go to Teddy Rides Again, and we go to the world's largest tin family, and then finally in town you see the Knight and the Dragon.
Today it is known as the Enchanted Highway, and it draws thousands of visitors every year. When the local school closed, he purchased it and turned the classrooms into hotel rooms, and also created a steakhouse and tavern, yet left touches like the old gym where people can still play basketball. There are more sculptures to create and more ideas he hopes to bring to fruition, especially when you consider he didn't know how to weld when he began the process. He hopes his work inspires others in small towns. Perhaps young people will be inspired to stay, create, and build businesses in rural areas. It's hard but rewarding work.
I will not see my project completed in my lifetime. We do have a new board now, Enchanted Highway Board. We have new people on there that are committed to keeping the project alive, because when I die, I hate to see it die when I die.
Traveling the countryside near Regent, North Dakota, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Did you know the United States produces more crude oil than any other country? And the biggest oil producing state by far is Texas. It's a big business in the state, and striking oil for the first time was a pivotal part of American history. As we learn, continuing our travels along the American countryside with Andrew McCrae.
Today this land is green space within the city of Beaumont, Texas, but in the early 20th century, it was a bustling place that had an impact on industries throughout the U.S. and the world.
January 10th, 1901, that's when we struck oil. The famous Lucas Gusher
Gina Summy says there had been speculation for several years that oil was under the ground here, and drilling had been attempted for about 10 years prior. When they did strike oil at a depth of around 1,200 feet, it was an amazing force that came rocketing from the ground. And while they were glad to see the oil they had hoped for, there was now a new problem: how to capture 100,000 barrels of it spewing to the surface every day.
They didn't even have the tools to actually cap the oil to stop it from spewing out. So it took them 9 days. And you can just imagine that the land all around was just covered in oil.
No one had ever seen something like this, and the gusher represented an important point in American history.
It marked the beginning of the petroleum industry, not just for Texas, but for the United States.
The Spindletop Boomtown Museum relives that important event, even recreating the day the Lucas Gusher came to life.
You're in for a treat.
Today it's a gusher of water rather than oil. And with the oil back in 1901 came people. Just as the gold and silver rushes had beckoned thousands westward, this black gold now had people flooding to southeast Texas.
They had about 400 to 500 people traveling in by train by the day, so you can just imagine how big the city grew.
Beaumont's population of 10,000 people swelled to 50,000 people in 3 months' time. Boomtowns like Gladys City, recreated here at the museum, share what life was like. The city was so short on housing, the barbers' chairs were rented as sleeping spots, and some people just bought tickets on the train so they could have a place to rest. But over the years, the flow of oil dwindled and towns like Gladys City faded. Citizens knew this was an important point in the country's industrial history, and while years had passed, the significance of the place was not lost.
They rebuilt the Gladys City, a replica, in around 1976. That's when the museum opened. They dedicated the Spindletop Monument. It was originally at the original site, and they moved it over here because the grounds were, couldn't hold it, but this was a better resting spot for it.
Traveling the countryside in Beaumont, Texas, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Still ahead, how a drive through farm country is pulling golfers in from everywhere. And think you have a lot of farm hats? One man in Minnesota probably has a few more. We'll take a look at his collection as we continue to travel the American countryside. In Nebraska, one family saw an opportunity for their farm when it came to golf. And as Andrew shows us, they've built an experience that will last for generations.
Bryce Anderson farms in view of the Missouri River in the northeast corner of Nebraska. His family grows corn and soybeans, some in the river bottom and some in the hills. And we did this interview on top of one of those hills.
When settlers first got here, this was all grassland. There were no trees, except along creeks and river bottoms and that sort of thing.
They bought this piece of ground, about 650 acres, in the mid-1980s and farmed it for a few years. Then the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP as it's often known, came along, and the ground has remained in that program ever since. But there was an idea within the Anderson family that perhaps a part of this ground could be used for a unique purpose.
My son, who is basically a scratch golfer, has been pressing for the last 10 years to do something along the lines of build a golf course.
They brought the idea to several golf course design firms, and all discouraged them from the project. There was simply too much dirt to move to smooth the terrain to make it walkable. But one company, King & Collins, saw promise in the project and took it on. They began to fill some valleys and lower hills to make a walkable course on the old CRP ground.
We just want it to be destination golf that is unique, will give people an experience that they can't have at most places, and so far it's working out.
It's called Landmand Golf Course. That's Landmand with a D at the end, the Danish word for farmer, a nod to the Anderson family's heritage. You will barely find a sign to direct you to the course, and you'll travel down several gravel roads in farm country to reach it. But many, many people make that drive.
We opened tee times on New Year's Eve for this year, and this is the first full season we've had. Within about a day, over 90% of the tee times were gone for the entire year.
You'll pass by tractors and machinery sheds when you drive up the hill to the small clubhouse. It's different, it's fun, and has received a lot of national attention.
We've had enough reviews that in the Golf Week magazine, we came in the top 26 public and private courses in the entire country.
The ground surrounding this course is still in the Conservation Reserve Program. The fairways traverse the hill ground overlooking the river bottom. It is truly a unique place to golf among the farm ground of northeast Nebraska.
This turned out to be much better than anything I ever expected. I've just been astounded by the job that the designers King and Collins did on this particular course.
So the ground that once grew corn and soybeans and then became CRP ground today grows grass greens, attracting farmers and people from across the nation to come and tap in a putt. Traveling the countryside near Homer, Nebraska, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Well, after a round of golf, a meal sounds nice. Coming up, we check out a little town called Moonshine and something called the Moon Burger that has people waiting in line. When you think of moonshine, you probably think of bootleggers. But for one Illinois town, moonshine has a different meaning as we continue to travel the countryside with Andrew McCrae.
It's just a crossroads in rural Illinois. You'll find the address these days listed as Martinsville, but this spot is a one-building town called Moonshine. Lisa Tuttle says there's a theory on the name.
We don't really know, but the story is they seen a reflection from the moon on a puddle.
There never was much here, except a store that served locals.
The store was built in 1912, and it's always been like a general store. It was like a post office, grocery store.
In the 1950s, Gladys Williams bought the Moonshine store and began serving lunches to local farmers and oilfield workers. In 1982, Helen Tuttle, Jackie and Lisa's mother-in-law, purchased the store. The sign here says the population is just 2, for their in-laws who used to live above the store. In fact, the 12:30 closing time is all because their mother-in-law cared for her father-in-law.
Helen decided she shut the grill down at 12:30 and she could be out the door by 1 to take him lunch and take care of Ed. And after he passed away, she just never went back.
And the grill shuts down at 12:30 each day, although they won't turn you away if you're standing in line. The place was popular and then reached national attention when CBS newsman Bill Geist came here in the early 2000s to do a story. Folks line up for a half-pound burger that is today served on a paper plate with all the fixins you want to load onto it.
They've always called them the Moon Burger, and people come in and think it's a specialty. I want the Moon Burger.
It's just the name of our burgers.
That's what people have kind of nicknamed our burgers.
It's just good ground beef, fresh, never frozen. On summer weekends, the line usually stretches out the door and down the road.
We say 600 to 800 on an average. We've been over 800 this summer, but it usually averages between 600 and 800.
While they do have to make money, they intentionally keep the prices as low as possible. The goal is to have a place that people of all ages can affordably come share a meal. There's little seating inside the store, so most enjoy the picnic tables outside under the trees. That leaves Lisa and Jackie to sometimes wonder why so many people travel so far to this out-of-the-way location just to eat a good burger. A recent experience perhaps shed light on what others see.
I come up behind this lady, she's like at the top of the big hill, and she's taking pictures across the field. And I'm like slowing, I'm trying to figure out what she's taking pictures of. So I go around her and I get here, well, they pull in. And I just said to her, I have to know. I said, what were you taking pictures of? And she's like, the landscape. And I'm like, I could not figure out what she was taking pictures of. And she's like, you have no idea. And I'm like, so do I take this for granted? And she said, yes, you do.
From burgers to treats, we check out the history behind the world's famous Heath Bar next. Summer has to come with summertime treats, but a Heath Bar is something you can enjoy year-round. Andrew McCrae takes us where the famous and unique chocolate bar got its start.
The story begins with L.S. Heath in Robinson, Illinois.
And he owned a dairy, and he opened this store up in 1914 for his sons to have a soda fountain and a lunch counter.
As Pam Hall shares, the brothers used their farm background and new business as a way to dabble in possible new products, and one of those offerings was a kind of candy.
They started messing around with different candy recipes, and this is where they created the Heath Bar.
The new candy carried the family name, But the Heath Bar may have remained popular just locally, if not for a twist of fate that brought it to a huge audience.
During World War II, they got a contract with the government to put Heath bars in the mess rations for the soldiers because it was less likely to melt like the other candies that they'd put in there.
The English toffee-style candy bar performed well in battle, so to speak, and it left an impression on all who ate it during the war.
When all of the soldiers came home, then they wanted Heath bars, and so then they had orders for all over the country.
For many years, all of that candy was made right here in this very store.
They had a kitchen upstairs, and they cooked a lot of they cooked all of their candy upstairs and shipped it out.
This was a family-owned company until 1989, when it was sold to Leaf. And then, in 1996, it was sold again to the Hershey Company. However, even with those changes, one thing has remained the same.
They had an agreement with the companies that bought the factory that they wouldn't take the Heath bar out of Robinson because it's kind of our only claim to fame that we have. And so they've honored that and kept the Heath bar in Robinson.
Traveling the countryside in Robinson, Illinois, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Now, most farmers have quite a collection of hats, but this collection is like nothing you've ever seen before, and one man is on a mission to keep the collection going. Next. Lots of folks have a pretty good hat collection on their farms, but leave it to Andrew McCrae. He stumbled on the world's largest collection of hats.
Filming my dad loading the semi.
In the 1960s, Scott Legrid's dad was farming, as well as selling livestock equipment and snowmobiles. He was on the road and would occasionally be given a hat by those with whom he did business.
What I had heard is he went into the closet to get something one day, and there was a bunch of hats on a shelf that was kind of different colors. And he said, that's kind of pretty. It'd be kind of fun just to collect some of them.
Scott's father began collecting hats, sorting and boxing them. As Scott grew, he and his father were always working on their family farm that dates to 1875. Many of the hats had ties to their livelihood.
A lot of it was farm hats. That's just because we're in that industry and our family's been doing it for so long. He had another couple rules. They had to have a patch on them or an advertisement. They couldn't be plain. And then they couldn't have any dirty sayings. They had to be clean sayings.
Over time, the collection grew, and his father set personal goals for the number and types of hats he wanted to collect.
So these are a lot of the John Deere hats.
One of those achievements was tied to John Deere dealerships.
He wanted to get a John Deere hat that said the state and the name of the dealership, implement dealer, from every state, so all 50 states.
And once he had all 50 states, he set out to get one from each Canadian province as well. Scott's father passed in 2011, which means Scott oversees thousands of hats today.
So this is still the world's largest hat collection. Over 109,000, I would guess about 115,000 if I had to take a guess.
And they did not collect duplicate hats, so each should be unique.
They got the same logo and colors, but if you look, this one is solid, and this one is mesh, so that makes them different.
Yep.
Scott has some hats displayed in his home, along the walls, and on shelves in the garage. There's 3 semi-loads of hats that have been boxed, documented, and categorized. They did that when Guinness Book certified the collection several years ago. Scott's father loved collecting hats, yet he says there is something a bit ironic about the collection.
He wasn't a big hat wearer. He wore a couple weeks in the spring for planting, and then a couple weeks in the fall when we harvested to keep the sun out of his eyes, of course. And that was it. Mostly in the winter he wore a stocking hat, and other than that he didn't wear one. So that's kind of funny.
But Scott, on the other hand, does wear hats, but he doesn't pick from the collection. It's kind of sacred.
I'll just stare at them for just a few minutes to remind myself of some of the companies that used to be around that aren't around anymore, because there's quite a few companies here that aren't around anymore, sad to say, just how times go.
Scott enjoys these hats, but he does hope they can find a permanent home someday where more people can see them, all of them, and the story they share about farming and more through what's emblazoned on the hats.
My dad was my best friend, and I'm proud for what he reached for his goals, and kind of fun to reminisce about it. It reminds me of my dad.
Traveling the countryside in Frost, Minnesota, I'm Andrew McCrae.
And our thanks to Andrew McCrae for taking us on a tour of the American countryside. Now, you can see more of his videos over at Farm Journal's YouTube page. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at Ag Day, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.